It's 1 o'clock. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 Elakha Alliance Virtual Science Symposium. We hold this symposium in the fall each year. You may be asking, who is the Elakha Alliance if you haven't heard of us before? We are a nonprofit based here in Oregon, working to make Oregon's marine and coastal ecosystems and communities more robust and resilient by restoring a healthy population of sea otters back to the Oregon coast. So we're really thrilled today to have some amazing speakers talk to you about the latest sea otter conservation updates. Our next presenter is a very close friend of mine and is the board president of the Elakha Alliance. And he authored the chapter in the new Sea Otter Conservation II book called Reintroductions and Restoring Nearshore Ecosystems, the Elakha Alliance, a new approach to sea otter conservation. Bob has spent nearly 40 years in coastal and ocean planning and management for the state of Oregon, and as a side note, is very musically and artistically talented. So I will pass it off to Bob to take it from here on summarizing his chapter.
Okay, are we there? Let's see.
Almost, it's loading.
We're not there. There we are. All right. Are we seeing it, Chanel?
There we go. Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm going to be reading my notes. I can't quite figure out how to get my notes and the camera aligned so that they it looks like I'm looking at you in the camera. So, but before I begin, I want to express my personal thanks to the co-editors Sean Larson, Jim Bodkin, and Aaron Foster for including the Elakha Alliance in this landmark volume. From the very beginning of our little adventure, when I reached out to Lillian Carswell, Jim, Sean, Jim Estes, and Tim Tinker, and other scientists who have devoted their entire careers with countless hours to this remarkable little creature, I was encouraged to pursue the return of sea otters and felt included in their world. So thank you. This chapter discusses an effort that is still a work in progress, and that the first draft of this chapter was written 3 years ago. So while the current details of our effort are not included, and we have not yet transported sea otters back to Oregon, the broad outlines of our organization and work are described in the hope that others, whether around sea otters or not, you might find our effort to be a useful example, just as we look to the effort to reintroduce Pregonish, the California condor, and the gray wolf for inspiration. I want to acknowledge our executive director, Jane Beccari, who joined the team 3 years ago and has become a fantastic leader in our work. Jane has had long experience in leadership in state government and local government, and it's been fun to see her employ her savvy and her skills to our mission. And I also want to note and thank the several members of the board of directors of the Elakha Alliance who are with us today. I hope that you find my talk interesting. So as Chanel just said, the Elakha Alliance is in fact a nonprofit organization based in Oregon that advocates for the return of sea otter Oregon coast. Simple story. So we are a citizen-led grassroots effort using sound science, public support, collaboration, and partnerships to promote the restoration of our nearshore marine ecosystem and the conservation of a species that once faced extinction. The Elakha Alliance is guided by these three fundamental ideas that we convey through a variety of messages and activities. Sea otters once played a central role in marine ecosystems. Now, this foundational idea is not news for anyone watching this presentation or reading the new book, but for many in the public, it is a new concept that gives us the chance to link this animal, which almost no one has ever seen wild on the Oregon coast, to the coastal environment that many do know and feel affection toward. For me personally, I really had no idea about sea otters and their importance in marine ecosystems until I went down this rabbit hole with the Elakha Alliance. And I think most people are the same way. So as I will discuss later, we have spent a lot of time and effort telling the scientifically well-documented story of the ecological role of sea otters in marine and estuarine ecosystems. We try to relate these well-studied effects of sea otters on the ecosystems to the experiences of our audience, say going fishing or crabbing at the coast, or whale watching, or just enjoying an early morning tide pool. We talk about the historic range of sea otters and their coevolution with canopy-forming kelps and other marine algae. We describe their unique life history characteristics that led to their voracious appetites, their small home ranges, and their keystone effects on the ecosystem.
Hey,
We
Bob, real
also talk
quick.
about why these animals disappeared from Oregon. Yes,
Hey, you're cutting in and out a little bit. Do you mind if I just turn your video off? Because maybe that'll save some
that's
bandwidth.
fine.
Okay.
Absolutely. Let me do that. Yeah, turn me off there.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so we also talk about why these animals disappeared from Oregon and throughout the range, and why they have recovered elsewhere, but not in Oregon or Northern California. And we try to link the effects of their continued absence to what they see for themselves today on the coast or what they have learned from the media. The second big concept, as I will also discuss later, is the prominence of sea otters in the culture of coastal indigenous people. This prominence was significant in two ways. One is the role that sea otters played in the daily lives of the people and in the cultural traditions of coastal people. And the other is how this cultural presence confirms the actual ecological presence of sea otters in Oregon and their role in the ecosystem. The cultural loss of sea otters in the late 1800s on the Oregon coast is a painful but necessary story to tell, as it is bound up in the larger story of the annihilation of Indian culture and loss of homelands in the American West. As you will hear, we engage our tribal members and tribal governments in helping to tell the story of the importance of returning sea otters to the Oregon coast. A third idea, and one that is central to this volume, is that sea otters as a species are still recovering from their near extinction more than a century ago. We understand and explain the genetic importance of reestablishing a sea otter population in the current 800-mile gap between the populations in Washington and California. We are also sensitive to the fact that today's marine environment is far busier and more dangerous to sea otters than 150 years ago. And so we are learning from our partners in California about the perils humans can pose and the steps we will need to take to reduce those dangers in Oregon. All it takes is to start a large fire is a small spark. In the late 1990s, David Hatch, whose family was of Hanas, Coos, and Aleut descent, built a small boat and needed just the right name. His search led him to the word Elakha, a word for sea otter derived from a Clatsop Indian language that had been incorporated into the Chinook jargon, a trade language concocted in the early 1800s by mountain men, fur trappers, sea captains, and Indians throughout the Oregon country as they traded for furs and other items. Dave liked the word, and it fit his boat. But his boat naming quest sparked his interest in sea otters and raised many questions. Why was it so? What was so important about them that they deserved a word in their jargon, in its jargon? How had sea otters figured in the cultures of coastal indigenous people? Why were they absent today? And what did that mean for our seemingly natural marine ecosystem? His quest led to some century-old maps that depicted kelp beds on the Oregon coast. The maps showed kelp beds in many places where they were not now present. He wondered whether the absence of sea otters affected the existence of kelp beds. And his search for the link between sea otters and kelp convinced him that sea otters needed to be returned to the Oregon coast. As he began to articulate and advocate the idea, he spoke with many others, seeking to inform and to enlist them in his cause. He hoped to form an alliance, an Elakha Alliance, to work for their return. David retired in 2016 and hoped to devote more time to his cause, but his life was tragically cut short not long after he retired. However, several of his colleagues and friends, myself included, began to discuss his idea of returning sea otters. Over the next year and a half, our discussions and those with scientists, state and federal agencies, and others revealed not just support for the idea, but enthusiasm. But it was clear that a new organization was needed, one that could lead the effort through what would surely be a long, complex, and politically difficult effort. So in late 2017, a group of us met in Siletz at the headquarters of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and agreed to incorporate the Elakha Alliance as a nonprofit organization devoted to returning sea otters to the Oregon coast. Articles of incorporation were filed with the state of Oregon in early 2018, and the Elakha Alliance was underway. As it turned out, David's idea of returning sea otters to the Oregon marine ecosystem was not just a good one, but a timely one, as events unfolded, bringing an urgency to his idea. The context for our rebirth was complex. We began life in the aftermath of two decades of tumult that had roiled the commercial and recreational fishery and Oregon's coastal communities. Given the role of the fishing industry in Oregon's coast and past pitched battles in California between abalone and sea urchin harvesters with sea otter advocates, we knew we would need to move carefully. During the previous 20 years, the West Coast fishing industry had been rocked by the closure of large swaths of the ocean to most commercial fishing due to overfishing. Some gear types had been banned. There were too many boats chasing too many fish, and the federal government bought out many of them. In Oregon, the state had undergone a politically turbulent process to designate a few marine reserves where fishing was prohibited and their associated marine protected areas where fishing was allowed but curtailed. Hard on the heels of this, Oregon fishermen and crabbers faced the prospect of ocean wave energy facilities that threatened to exclude crabbing and fishing from nearshore areas. More recently, offshore wind energy proposals would rock the fishing industry in Oregon as well. In addition, ocean salmon fishing, an iconic commercial and recreational fishery, struggled as salmon runs fluctuated wildly and state and federal fishery agencies imposed restrictions to protect what was left of salmon stocks. Adverse ocean conditions, increasingly linked to climate change, added pressure on salmon fisheries. And further complicating the task, a growing population of sea lions and seals, both protected by federal law, often resulted in fishermen hooking a salmon near the mouth of a river or an estuary, only to watch the sea lion tear into their fish. Ocean crab fishermen were being required to adapt their gear and their catch areas to avoid entangling migrating whales whose populations were rebounding under federal law. We also begin life against a backdrop of headlines about the direct and indirect effects of Earth's changing climate on the marine environment. A marine heat wave that we've heard about previously, dubbed the blob by the media, had dramatically warmed ocean waters across the Northeast Pacific Ocean, alarming fishermen, scientists, and the public. As salmon runs failed and warm water species appeared. Oyster growers in coastal estuaries found increasingly acidic ocean waters that were killing young oysters. Dramatic headlines and TV news stories told of vanishing kelp forests along the Pacific coast, overrun by a horde of purple sea urchins. Almost overnight, from British Columbia to California, and from shore into deeper water, sea otters mysteriously melted and died, removing yet another creature that kept sea urchins in check. The kelp forests that once fueled the nearshore ecosystem were disappearing, and the public noticed. As it turned out, though, our mission to return sea otters and restore kelp forests offered a message of environmental hope for many. We know this from the letters and heartfelt donations from people who live far from the ocean, have never even seen a live sea otter. School children who send us their ideas, their artwork, and their donations. People participating in our events tell us that returning sea otters is a bright light in a world that is increasingly dark. Helping to return sea otters to the Oregon coast is their expression of hope for themselves and their children. So this is what the Elakha Alliance and our mission have become for many, and honestly, why we feel so motivated to achieve our vision. One of the unique aspects of the Elakha Alliance is the foundational involvement of Oregon's coastal Indian tribes in the organization itself and in the work to achieve our mission. As I explained earlier, it began with Dave Hatch, a tribal council member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, and his advocacy with his tribal council colleagues and other tribes in Oregon. Dolores Pigsley, the longtime tribal council chair of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, told me about accompanying Dave on trips to the congressional offices in Washington, D.C., where they tromped in the sweltering summer heat from office to office, carrying a heavy and very warm sea otter pelt to show the congressional members. Today, five tribal members serve on our board of directors. Robert Kenta and Peter Hatch, both from the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. Chief Doug Barrett and Scott Slider, Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. And Laura Beth Barton, Coquille Indian Tribe. Previous tribal board members were the late Chief Don Ivy from the Coquille Indian Tribe, who was the foundational member of the Elakha Alliance, the late Chief Doc Slider from Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians, and Chief Jason Yonker from the Coquille Indian Tribe. Telling the story of the cultural importance of sea otters to coastal indigenous people underlies and animates much of our work. In 2022, the Oregon Zoo produced a short video for the Elakha Alliance that explores why the cultural aspect is so important. This 6-minute video is available on the Elakha Alliance YouTube channel, and I certainly commend it to you. The Elakha Alliance is keenly interested in advancing tribal leadership in both the translocation of sea otters to Oregon and in the long-term monitoring and management of the population over time. We recently assisted the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians to apply for and receive a large multi-year grant that will enable them and other tribes in Oregon and California to build capacity to take on the leadership for this work. In our view, these coastal Indian tribes, as sovereign nations, must have a role in seeing that sea otters reclaim their former place in the lives of coastal Indian people. From the beginning, well before incorporation, we understood that returning sea otters to Oregon would need to involve the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which has authority over sea otters under the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. Some of our first consultations were with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service staff in Newport, Santa Cruz, and Portland. In 2020, the service provided modest funding that enabled the Alliance to complete a scientific feasibility study in early 2022. Not long after, the service completed its own feasibility assessment that referred to our study. We continued to collaborate with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologists at the local and state level, even though it seems increasingly clear that the interests of the service lie primarily with recovery of the southern sea otter in California rather than the return of sea otters to Oregon. Early in our work, we began collaboration and communication with the staff and leadership of the U.S. Marine Mammal Commission, a small independent federal agency charged with providing comprehensive oversight of federal government science, policy, and management actions affecting marine mammals and their ecosystems. We also established and continue to maintain communication and collaboration with leadership and staff of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, which has regulatory involvement in returning sea otters to Oregon. And I would acknowledge there's a number of ODF&W staff folks watching this today. We recently worked with ODF&W staff and its Oversight Commission to add sea otters and kelp forest to the 2026-2035 State Wildlife Action Plan. And we remain sensitive to ODF&W's limited budget that offers little, if any, flexibility for staff to work on issues pertaining to sea otter recovery. Since this chapter was written, we have come to believe that state leadership, under a formal delegation of authority from the federal government and subsequent co-management agreements between the state and coastal tribes, is the preferable direction for our path. From its inception, the Elakha Alliance sought to act thoughtfully and strategically. Such an approach would be attractive to potential funders, indicate seriousness of purpose, and be effective in communicating our mission to the public. So this is our vision, included in our first strategic plan that was completed in late 2019 with financial assistance from the Meyer Memorial Trust and with the participation of a wide range of stakeholders and partners. We have reviewed this plan annually with input from these partners, which has resulted in a few updates to reflect emerging situation and realities. I would note that we did not just complete a strategic plan. We retained our strategic consultant, Jonathan Poisner, who had helped us to develop the plan, and he has led a review and updated the plan every few years. He understands organizations and has been instrumental in keeping us on track and providing the strategic advice when needed. So this is our current mission statement: to make Oregon's marine and coastal ecosystems and communities more robust and resilient by restoring a healthy population of sea otters to the Oregon coast. So based on the vision and mission, we've got these basic strategic goals or initiatives. One is around the science and policy side of our work, to complete the scientific, socioeconomic, and public policy assessments necessary to determine the methods for and impacts of restoring and protecting a healthy population of sea otters on the Oregon coast. The second one is to build broad public support on the coast and statewide for restoring a healthy sea otter population. And the third is to work to ensure that tribal, state, and federal government plans and policies include sea otter introduction to Oregon as a priority. And assuming we can do these first three initiatives, then we will move on to initiative number 4, which is to introduce a viable population of sea otters to one or more suitable sites on the Oregon coast with follow-up monitoring. And even as number 4 is implemented, we will continue to work on the first 3 items. So we've completed several foundational pieces of our strategic plan. As I mentioned, in 2022, a feasibility study was completed, co-authored by a team of outstanding scientists led by Tim Tinker, whose paper was presented earlier today, and contributing authors Jim Bodkin, Jim Estes, Sean Larson, Mike Murray, and Jan Hodder. It was like having an all-star team come in and help our Little League effort. The feasibility study was entitled Restoring Sea Otters to the Oregon Coast, and it was intended to provide a credible scientific basis for future decisions about translocations and to provide information for public debate. The study is posted in digital form on the Elakha Alliance website, where it may be downloaded. chapter by chapter, I might add. We also provided a hard copy to all coastal municipal and academic libraries, and a print copy may be ordered by you from the Elakha Alliance website. So yeah, we felt like this was a major accomplishment that we had to get under our belts right off the bat. So currently, though, along with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, we're supporting the work of Dr. Tim Tinker to develop science-based population scenarios to better understand reintroduction options and to support our ongoing dialogue with fishermen in coastal ports. Led by our coastal community coordinator, Kyle Motley, who lives and works from Coos Bay, this science-based dialogue with crabbers, divers, and other fishermen in local communities is key to understanding their concerns, reducing anxiety and misinformation, and identifying specific areas with potential impacts, with the potential for impacts from sea otters. Oregon Sea Grant, through its Science and Fishermen Exchange or SAFE program, has provided several opportunities for Kyle and Tim to discuss the model with local ocean users. In 2023, we completed a coastwide economic impact assessment. It predicts overall economic benefits to the Oregon coast from returning sea otters, but cautions that some economic sectors may be adversely affected. The study was funded in part by the Oregon Coast Visitors Association and by a generous private donor. But because the Oregon coast covers 360 miles, we wanted to drill down to more local, sector-based impacts. So we commissioned a study of potential impacts on the travel-based economic sector on the southern Oregon coast, a region where sea otters once lived and where they may likely return. The study projects that the return of sea otters to that region will have substantial economic benefit for the communities in that stretch of coast. And both of these are available on our website. I would also say that for the economic study, we did kind of a public translation to turn what is otherwise a pretty unreadable document into something that's much more publicly accessible. So as we move to continue into the public support arena, our first step was to make a wide range of information continuously available on demand for self-learning. We like to think that our website is the world's most complete information source pertaining to sea otters, and I commend it to you. Our YouTube channel, which is where all the videos from today's symposium will go, our YouTube channel hosts nearly 100 videos, most of which are science presentations about all aspects of sea otter ecology and related topics. Sean, Jim, and others have all contributed more than one presentation, but many of the others cover everything from white sharks to Brent Hughes and his work in Elkhorn Slough. So the YouTube channel is a great way to learn, and there's not even a quiz afterwards. So social media has been another major platform, another major approach for us. And Chanel, our Director of Outreach and Community Engagement, is also our social media maven. She and Katie Russell, also a social media whiz, create and update our media feeds on a nearly continuous basis to help inform and build a community around sea otters. It isn't just putting information out there, but it's helping people get their arms around each other as we look at returning sea otters. Chanel produces a monthly newsletter, The Raft, which goes to a large email list to keep donors and supporters advised of news, upcoming events, and more. And during our work to update the State Wildlife Action Plan that I referenced earlier, we called on our supporters to let the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife know that they support returning sea otters to Oregon. And more than 700 did, an astounding number that definitely got the attention of that agency. I worked for a state government for most of my career, and getting 700 comment letters on anything would have been just unthinkable. So we believe that that's a direct result of the social media community, or the community that's been built through the social media. But we're not just confined to that. We have found that some of the traditional media platforms are really effective reaching certain audiences. We have found that local radio stations, for instance, are important information delivery mechanisms to smaller communities on the coast. We can reach people at work, when they're in the car, or when they're around the house. Television, which is an utterly different medium, helps to connect our work to current events and news. And we've found that local TV, especially, is in constant need of content to fill out the nightly local news or the morning talk shows, and we are happy to oblige. Likewise, local, regional, and even national publications provide opportunities to tell our story to readers, and those are articles that have that endure. You know, they lay around. People read them over time, spread them around. So all these traditional media platforms have helped to spread our message and explain our work. The really fun stuff is connecting with people face to face, even if that is time intensive and often requires long drives. But our devoted members of staff, our board, and volunteers are there at a dizzying array of these community events, tabling at the Oregon Coast Aquarium or Oregon Zoo. We providing information at the annual Saltwater Sportsman Show, and many, many other social events, special events, some of which we have concocted and some of which we join that others sponsor, such as Kyle, lower left here, Kyle being shown on the dock at Port Orford, or on the lower right, a group of sailors visiting Portland at the downtown Portland Aquarium that we've hooked up with. So between these and other presentations, pub talks, paint and sip nights at local pubs, we've got a variety of platforms to meet people in public, in person, and have a lot of fun doing it. And the fun is really the big part. As a non-governmental agency, we get to provide as much fun and enjoyment as possible for our supporters and potential supporters. And of course, one of the big events is our annual Sea Otter Beer Fest, held at the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, which has been a big hit with every year, with about a dozen or so special Sea Otter themed brews, and a good time is had by all. Other events are such as this Art on the Beach event. I did not show the entire drawing here, but there's another big part of this that shows kelp. But big public art events like this also help to spread the word in a fun and understandable way. Of course, implementing the plan means forming strategic partnerships to build out the concept of the alliance. In fact, our strategic plan recognizes that the Elakha Alliance is really at the center of a circle of partners, and the key pieces of the work will not be done by the Alliance itself, but rather by other entities that have appropriate resources, skills, and/or legal authority. As such, an important activity in our strategic plan is the outreach necessary to develop these strategic partners. The logos shown here represent just a few of the partners in our work. I did not include on here the Cincinnati Zoo, for instance, because I couldn't find a good logo for them. But we've established a very fun and interesting partnership with the Cincinnati Zoo. Who would have thought? So by the time sea otters are back in Oregon waters, this list will have grown substantially. One of the key lessons we have learned from the work to date is from reintroducing condors in Northern California and removing dams on the Klamath River is that it will take many partners, each playing a role over a long period of time to accomplish these efforts. So we will continue to build our engagement with our tribal partners and to help elevate their voices in return of sea otters and marine stewardship. We assisted the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians to submit and receive a successful 3-year grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And so we will be working closely with them and other tribes, including the Yurok, Tallawatdini, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Loramqua Indians, to carry out that grant and build and elevate tribal leadership in all of our efforts. As to the future, Steve Miller famously sang 20 years ago that time keeps on slipping into the future. So we have been on our official journey now for almost 8 years. Will it take another 8 years? But who knows? We exist in the real world and don't control key aspects of our future success. Condor restoration took 20 years. Bringing down the Klamath dams took 40 years. We have come to believe that our success lies down the path of state and tribal leadership rather than federal. We understand, of course, that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will play a key legal and regulatory role, though, no matter what. But we believe that state and tribal leadership is more achievable and more acceptable to the public and less susceptible to the big-scale political dynamics that are beyond our control. In addition, the advent of future role of the Wildlife Conservation Network Fund and its Sea Otter Fund in California is a hopeful development, but it is unknown as to how its support will come into play. There is much, much more to say about the Elakha Alliance and our work, but I'll stop here and simply say that the full story is yet to be written. So stay tuned and join us on our journey. Again, my heartfelt thanks to Jim, Sean, and Aaron for including the Elakha Alliance in this splendid and important new volume. And I'd be happy to answer questions, either now or by email. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Bob. That was awesome. It was like looking at my daily life working for the Elakha Alliance.
Yes, it was. That's exactly what it was.
That was amazing. Okay, we've got a question. If you want to pop your video on, Bob, maybe it'll be okay for the bandwidth.
Oh,
Okay.
you have to allow me to.
Oh, oops. Did I shut you down?
You were disabled me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Let's see.
Start my video.
There you go.
Just start my video.
Okay. Cynthia asks, how are you getting young people in Oregon involved in this effort to reintroduce sea otters to the Oregon coast? And is there a path for multi-generational efforts, for example, elders and children?
Chanel, would you like to answer that about the children? And
Yeah,
getting young people involved? We're doing it.
yeah. So we engage with all ages and demographics throughout the entire year. So we present all the way from kindergarten classrooms to retirement communities about the efforts of the Elakha Alliance. A lot of times schools and classrooms want to get involved in a larger, impactful way. So they've written letters to legislatures before. They've hosted their own fundraisers at the school to benefit the Elakha Alliance. So there's a lot of really wonderful partnerships with school groups, honestly, across the United States, not just here in Oregon. So if you, by chance, work for a company that does lunch and learn talks, I've presented to Amazon Web Services and other various construction companies, and it doesn't matter who you are, we'd love to talk to you about the Elakha Alliance. I can put a link in the chat to request us to speak.
I would just add too that I know that Kyle has done a number of talks to, for instance, North End High School, maybe some grade schools. I know he's done camps at outdoor education camps at South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve, etc. So, and just out of the blue, we had a group of middle school students at Mount Tabor in Portland, Mount Tabor Middle School in Portland, who had a couple of years before that formed a little group they called the Animal Savings Club, and they showed up for us raising money by making little Christmas cards and selling it and giving us the money. It was just the sweetest thing. So a lot of room for creativity and just getting everybody involved.
Yes. Okay, we have another question in. I might have missed it, but is there a forecasted time for another translocation trial?
The answer is no. Uh, I hope it's within my lifetime. Uh, it's probably not going to be less than another 4 years, but it may not happen for 10 years. There's a lot of the political and financial stars have to line up. Um, and we need to thread the needle through regulatory procedures and environmental impact reviews and all that stuff. So yeah, I would hope that it's within the next 4 or 5 years, but right now we don't have that timetable.
Fingers crossed. Um,
Fingers crossed.
Yes, and to piggyback off of Bob's presentation, the next Oregon Otter Beer Festival, which is our largest fundraiser, and next year will be our 5th year, so it'll be the biggest, best fundraiser ever, will be April 11th at OMSI in Portland. So if you are already subscribed to our RAF newsletter, you will be the first to know when tickets get released, and it does sell out every year. So I highly suggest that you come next year and celebrate with us. It's a really fun time. Um, okay, some people, oh, here we go. Let's see. Would you know if we would introduce southern or northern sea otters, Bob?
Well, I will answer it this way. First of all, it's complicated, but the fact is that there are a, a ton of sea otters in Southeast Alaska, 20,000 or so, and those are not on the endangered species list, which makes things a lot easier. Whereas the total of about 3,000, and they are listed as a threatened species. So the regulatory hoops to bring them north from California versus the fewer regulatory hoops to bring animals from Alaska mean that we'll probably get them out of Alaska. No decision has been made, but that's likely the scenario. And the question always arises, what about the genetics? They're sea otters. And the archaeological evidence shows that there was a transition zone between northern and southern sea otters along the Oregon coast. So we're not really going to worry about that. What we're really going to worry about is how many can we get and bring them back. So
Yes, they're not the most easy animal to capture. Um, We've got another question for you, Bob. What is the most helpful thing that people can do to help move this effort forward in the next year?
Well, I would say the most helpful thing you can do is when we ask that we let our elected officials and our agency folks know that you in the public want this to happen. I think that's going to have a huge impact. This is a political campaign, among other things. This is really about voting for sea otter return without actually voting for them. So as we showed with the state wildlife uh, action plan, the power of the public comments and the number of them was really, to me, just very decisive. So that's going to be the biggest thing for right now. Is stay tuned and be ready to mobilize.
I just put in the chat a link to an action alert that we created. So if you are an Oregon resident, you can go through that and it
Yeah.
will send a letter of support of the Elakha Alliance and that sea otter reintroduction is important to you to Governor Tina Kotek.
So yes, and let me add to that. I think that's really important. Uh, from what we know, the governor is pretty supportive of the idea of returning sea otters to Oregon. But she plays on a larger political stage and needs to know that you support her in doing so. So I think it would be wonderful if people could ping Governor Kotek and let her know that you support bringing sea otters back to Oregon. It's sort of like the old powder milk biscuits commercial from Prairie Home Companion. It's like gives local elect or gives elected officials the courage to stand up and do what needs to be done. So that would be great. I think she'd enjoy hearing from you too.
Definitely. Okay, we've got another question. Is there any environmental change that needs to happen to be able to introduce otters to Oregon or habitat changes?
Not that I know of. I think we need to be cognizant of the food resources and shelter, et cetera, where we might want to put them back in the water, but no.
Yeah, both our scientific feasibility study on reintroducing sea otters to Oregon and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service feasibility assessment on reintroduction in Northern California and Oregon both concluded that it is feasible to return them back to the Oregon coast, which means there is enough suitable habitat and prey and everything a sea otter would need to establish itself back safely on the Oregon coast. And there is a new model that Tim Tinker did create that also has updated data and kelp forest coverage maps showcasing the likelihood of success in sea otters being reintroduced in certain places along the Oregon coast and California, which should be coming out soon with those results. Let's see. Do we have any other questions for Bob? Looks like perhaps not.
All right. You know all there is to know about the Elakha Alliance.
It's all there. Yeah, definitely go check out our website if you haven't already. Okay,